So now let's look at this Sermon on the Mount. This is probably the most famous sermon of Jesus. It's recorded in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. So let's look at some of his key teachings about the kingdom of heaven. In chapter 5, verse 3, he says, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. He says this in verse 20, but I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And then in verse 43, he says, you've heard that the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. See, I think Jesus was making a couple of points here in all these verses, and go back and read all of those points that he made in his sermon in those few chapters. The first point that I think Jesus is making is this: the kingdom of heaven, his kingdom, is different than what the people were expecting. It's a godly kingdom, not an earthly kingdom. And so some of the teachings that he brought were totally unexpected. It was completely different than anything they'd learned before or anything that was in their law. He was going deeper than the external laws, and he was going down to the matters of the heart. And here's the second thing I think Jesus was trying to get across. The standard for the kingdom is absolute righteousness. And what he wanted people to understand was that they needed him to come and fulfill all righteousness for them, which is exactly what Jesus did. If you've gone through 101, you know this, that Jesus came on a rescue mission from God. He fulfilled all the righteous requirements of the law that we couldn't fulfill. He drilled down to the heart of the law. He helped them to see what it was all really about at the end of the day, and then he lived it out for them perfectly. And he wanted all of us to know that our righteousness had to be greater than the Pharisees' superficial righteousness, that every single person who would recognize the true heart of God would come to him, would see him in Jesus, and would accept what Jesus did on the cross for him. And he says this in Matthew 5, verse 48, but you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And of course, the only way to be perfect, we know this now, the only way to be perfect is by putting your faith in Jesus Christ. And the Bible says that the righteousness of Jesus Christ would be credited to our account. Now, why don't you hit pause and talk about it? And we'll see you in the next video.